But before we begin our Bible study, we're going to allow a few moments of silent time where you can pray and represent yourself before the throne of grace. Time to use the rebound technique if needed, which is simply 1 John 1:9. We confess our sins, He is faithful and just to forgive us and cleanse us of all unrighteousness. Let's bow our heads together for a few moments. And so we see the story of Israel as a perfect example to us. And Israel was involved in at least two different major revolts. And we'll find that one of those revolts led to a national revival of Judaism and the worship of God and temple worship, and Israel ridded herself of all the pagan influence. In one revolt, it was spectacular, the revival that happened in Israel. And then one revolt led to complete and utter destruction, where the entire Jewish population was removed from Jerusalem. What happened? Why was one successful and one complete destruction? Why on one hand could the Jews revolt and win their freedom and bring back national prosperity and temple worship? Why on one hand did it work so delightfully, and why on the other hand were they destroyed and they were conquered and they got ran out of their country? What was the impetus behind these things? And so the issue we're going to find in the end is that revival was leading to a growing pivot in the first revolt, and that reversionism was leading to a declining pivot, even a non-existent pivot in the second revolt. Are we okay? A growing pivot, a declining pivot. A revolt that was successful, a revolt that was tragic. So, in order to bring these concepts to light, I am going to have to give you some history. And what we're going to do is look at the history behind both of these revolts. And if we're going to do that, we've got to take it all the way back. We're going to take it back all the way to Alexander the Great. And Alexander the Great, around 330 BC, in that time, is when he came to prominence and when he showed up in Jerusalem. And so I'm going to start with Alexander, and we're going to find that his kingdom was divided and Hellenistic influence came to Jerusalem, and this was the instigator of the first revolt. So I'm going to read some history to you, so you're going to have to bear with me as we take a look at this. Alexander the Great lived from 356 to 323 BC. While the Persian Empire was rapidly disintegrating, Philip II of Macedon was consolidating his forces and preparing to destroy it. He wanted to see Grecian control of the whole world. But in 336 BC, he was murdered by his bodyguard, Pausanias. Philip's son, Alexander III, that is the Great, was only 21 years old when he took the throne. Aristotle had tutored him since he was 13, and he was convinced that the Greek way of life was superior. Consequently, his dream was to continue his father's conquest of the world in order to Hellenize it. His first 2 years of rule involved the consolidation of the Hellenic League. In 334, he crossed the Hellespont and soundly defeated the Persian army at the foot of Mount Ida by the river Granicus in the area of Troy. This opened Asia Minor to Alexander, Turkey as we know it. And in little more than a year, he was at Issus. In the fall of 333, he defeated Darius III at Issus and marched southward, conquering Tyre and Gaza. Now see, he's getting close to Israel. While in Palestine, though it is difficult to know the chronological sequence, Alexander went to the temple in Jerusalem and offered sacrifices to God under the direction of the high priest. Alexander was shown from the book of Daniel that he was the one predicted to destroy the Persian Empire. That is Daniel 8, verses 5 through 7, and verse 20. He was showed the scroll where he was in there. He accepted this interpretation, and being favorably disposed, he granted the Jews' request that in Palestine and Babylonia and Media they might live according to their ancestral laws and might be exempt from tribute every sabbatical year. Although the historicity of this account has been greatly disputed among scholars, it does show that the relationship between Alexander and the Jews was amicable. And history gives no reason to doubt this, because Alexander pummeled everyone everywhere he went. Why didn't he kill all the Jews and subjugate them and make them slaves? In fact, he was wowed when they broke out the scroll and said, "Look, here you are. You're the conqueror. And by the way, it pays to know your prophecy." The Jewish scholars recognized, even though Alexander had only come around the bend of the Mediterranean, they recognized who he was in prophecy. And so, here you go. It pays to know the prophecies of the Bible. And they probably saved hundreds, maybe even thousands of lives by showing Alexander where he was there in Daniel. Alexander then proceeded to Egypt, conquered it without trouble, and spent winter there. In the spring of 331, he marched east, and by July 330 BC, he had defeated Darius and become king over Persia. And then he fulfilled the prophecy. See? He moved eastward as far as the lower Indus and died in Babylon in 323 as a world conqueror when he was only 4 months short of age 33. Amazing life. So now we see that Alexander has died and his generals are going to take control of his conquered area, and there's going to be a lot of trouble because of that. And so history has been pretty plain up to this point. We followed Alexander. He came out of Greece and he conquered everywhere he went, and he conquered the known world. By the way, history favors the strong and the well-prepared and the organized. And Alexander was a very strong warrior, very strong leader. And not only that, he spread his language, Koine Greek, everywhere he went, called the language of God, because the entire New Testament is written in Koine Greek. And therefore, history favors the strong. History favors the bold. And so you find in both cases the Jews, they were prepared mentally. They were looking. They were alert and aware. And when Alexander came on the scene, they put two and two together very quickly, and they saved their country by knowing prophecy. Now let's try to follow Alexander's generals and their struggle for power and how this led up to the Jewish revolt against Hellenism. You'll have to bear with me now. Alexander's death caused great strife among his generals as they attempted to gain power of portions of his kingdom. By 311 BC, Seleucus was recognized as the ruler of Babylonia. This marked the commencement of the Seleucid dynasty era between 323 and 301. Palestine was the battlefield in the strife among the generals. For 8 years, it was controlled by the Ptolemies. But in 315, it was taken by Antigonus, although to be recaptured by Ptolemy in 312. Only soon to lose it again to Antigonus. In 301, however, Antigonus was killed in a decisive battle at Ipsus in Phrygia. An agreement had been made in 303 that upon Antigonus' defeat, Coelesyria should be given to Ptolemy. Since Ptolemy had not taken part in the battle as it had been planned, Seleucus felt that he should receive Coelesyria. But Ptolemy forestalled him and took the land. The action was the bone of contention between Seleucidian and Ptolemaic houses for decades to come. And so these two generals and their descendants were against each other. Palestine remained under the control of the Ptolemies until won by the Seleucids, led by Antigonus III, that's the Great, at the Battle of Panias. Thus the Seleucids acquired the land they considered rightly theirs. And so basically what it boils down is the Seleucids and their family are going to gain rulership over Palestine, and we're going to see these descendants come to power. So the Seleucidan rule lasted from 198 BC to 63 BC. Now 63 BC, you need to keep that number in your head. That's going to be the second revolt. Bone there. The rule of the Seleucids over Palestine lasted until Pompey made it a Roman province in 63 BC. This article discusses the period only from 198, when Palestine came under Seleucid control, until 143, when Israel gained its independence. Upon the victory over the Ptolemies, Antiochus III allowed the Jews to worship according to their laws and to complete and maintain the temple. And so the first ruler they had as a Seleucidian was good. They kept their temple worship. They even allowed them to rebuild and keep going. They're in good shape. No reason to be upset. He exempted the council of elders, priests, and the scribes of the temple from taxes. The citizens of Jerusalem enjoyed this exemption for 3 years, and after that period were exempted from a third part of their taxes. Antiochus also released the prisoners. The Jews enjoyed a brief period of tranquility under the Seleucids because of these privileges and because their rulers were concentrating on their efforts in the West. So far, so good. They're under Greek or Hellenistic rule. and life is okay because they still have their temple, they can still worship, and everything is great. But change is coming. Rome had defeated both Hannibal at Zama in 202 and the Macedonian monarch in 197. Because of the new threat, the Seleucids made a peace treaty with Egypt. Antiochus then invaded Thrace in 196. With the persuasion of Hannibal, he invaded Greece, which the Romans had evacuated in 194. The Romans retaliated, however, and defeated Antiochus at Thermopylae in 191 and Magnesia in Asia Minor in 190. At Apamea in 189, a peace treaty was signed. That's between the Greeks and the Romans. Antiochus agreed to give up Asia Minor, that's Turkey, north and west of the Tarsus Mountains, and much of his military force to pay a heavy indemnity over a 12-year period. To guarantee the payment, the Romans took 20 hostages, that's Greeks, to Rome. In other words, they kidnapped some Greek kids. Among them was Antiochus' son, Antiochus IV Epiphanes. Remember him. He is kidnapped by the Romans, and he's raised in Rome. Okay? By the way, remember the rule of child abuse? When the abused grows up without seeing justice, the cycle of abuse not only continues, it intensifies. So you have this young man who was kidnapped as a child by enemy soldiers and taken to a foreign country, and here he is, he's going to come back. Watch. Antiochus III was superseded by his second son, Seleucus IV, in 187. In 175, however, Heliodorus assassinated Seleucus to seize the throne. Antiochus' third son, Antiochus IV Epiphanes, had just been released from Rome as a hostage. And with the help of Eumenes II, the king of Pergamum, he ousted Heliodorus and made himself king. So this guy just got released from prison after 20 years of torture. He comes back to town. He ousted the ruler and made himself king. Because his newly acquired kingdom lacked political and financial stability, Antiochus IV attempted to unify it by vigorous Hellenization program. In other words, you're going to change the culture. He had to change the culture from Judaism to Hellenism. One of the unifying factors was religion. He encouraged the people to worship his own person in the form of the Olympian Zeus. Though his name, Theos Epiphanes, means the manifest God, his enemies called him Epimanes, a change of only one letter in the Greek, which means madman or insane. This gives you the nature of this guy's character. Now he's going to be ruling in Israel, okay, in Jerusalem. And so they're going to have real problems. So this is the guy who brings on the alert that, hey, we've got to win our freedom back. Are you okay listening to some more history? You're still with me. You're not sleeping yet. Okay, I'm not used to giving you this much at one time, so I just had to check. Let's see if we can keep going. Soon after Antiochus had acquired the throne, he had to settle a dispute between the high priesthood. There was a guy who offered him a lot of money and promised him that he would promote the Hellenization of the Jews who won the priesthood. I'm going to skip forward to the Maccabean revolt, and it's going to give you why we saw the Jewish revolt, what exactly happened. In 168 to 166, in the winter of 169, the rival brothers Ptolemy the sixth and Ptolemy the eighth agreed to end their dispute and unite against their uncle Antiochus the fourth. Thus, in the spring of 168, Antiochus the fourth invaded Egypt a second time. He captured Memphis, but when he attempted to subdue Eleusis, a suburb of Alexandria, the Roman general Popilius Lanius gave him an ultimatum from the Senate to withdraw immediately from Egypt. Antiochus immediately retreated, having learned of Rome's power as its hostage for 14 years. Embittered, Antiochus decided to establish Palestine as a buffer state between him and the Roman encroachment. So he retreated from Egypt in the south, and now he says, okay, where am I going to go? I know I can make a home in Jerusalem, in Israel, and here's Rome up here, here's Egypt down here. I'm going to move right here to Jerusalem, and I'm going to establish my headquarters. So he destroyed the walls of Jerusalem and refortified the old Davidic city, making it a pagan stronghold called Acra. Considering himself Zeus Epiphanes, that is God, he ordered a vigorous Hellenization program that would exterminate the Jewish religion. Now, I want to stop and give you a concept of history. If you are going to quell a person or a people group from obtaining their freedom, you have to take away their culture of freedom, and you have to substitute something else. And you need to remember that the communist conspiracy to destroy America uses this concept: to destroy your Judeo-Christian heritage and replace it with one half tribalism and the other half socialism. And this is exactly what Antiochus Epiphanes is going to do. He is going to destroy Judaism. He is going to destroy the reading of the Torah. He is going to destroy Jewish culture, and he is going to replace it with demon worship, and a people will be easily enslaved because of it. He forbade the Jews to celebrate the Sabbath and feasts, to offer the traditional sacrifices, and to perform circumcision. He ordered the destruction of the copies of the Torah. The Jews were ordered to offer up unclean sacrifices on idolatrous altars and to eat swine's flesh. That was tragic in the eyes of the Jews. The climatic act was on 25 Chislev, that's December 16th, 167, when the Temple of Jerusalem became the place of worship of the Olympian Zeus. The altar of Zeus was erected on the altar of burnt offering, that's the bronze altar outside, and swine's flesh was offered on it. Now, the abomination of desolation has a dual prophecy. There's going to be an abomination of desolation in the midpoint of the tribulation, but this was also part of the abomination of desolation. You see that pagan god was worshipped. That should have been a sign to the Jews. In 166 BC, now this is interesting. In every village of Palestine, sacrifice was to be offered to the heathen gods under the supervision of imperial representatives. In the village of Modin, an aged priest named Mattathias, an old priest, an old preacher. He wasn't scared of dying. He was probably almost already dead anyway. This guy, an aged priest, Mattathias, defied the command of Antiochus the Fourth to offer the sacrifice on the heathen altar. When another Jew was about to comply, Mattathias killed him. And the legate, that's the Greek guy, and destroyed the altar, saying, "Let everyone who is zealous for the law and supports the covenant come out with me." This guy had been reading the story of Elijah. He wasn't going to put up with this now. And what a great heritage. What a great story. And the truth is that this guy lit the fire right here for the Jewish revolution against Hellenism. Are y'all okay to keep going? All right. Mattathias and his 5 sons, remember these guys, John, Simon, Judas, Eleazar, and Jonathan. And many other Jews fled to the mountains. This marked the beginning of the Maccabean revolt. So when you think about Maccabean revolt, you think about good. This is more like the revolt that we had against England. These guys are about to win their freedom. They're tired of corruption. Mattathias and his followers exhorted Jews everywhere to join their struggle against Hellenization. They gained the support of the Hasidim, those who were faithful to the Torah. In other words, if we would call our people who was faithful to the Word of God. They tore down heathen altars and circumcised children who had been left uncircumcised. Now see, he's been reading about Nehemiah. That's exactly what Nehemiah did. After a long life, Mattathias died in 166. He exhorted his sons to continue the struggle and appointed his 3rd son, Judas, as the commander of the war. So Judas, he's a bad dude. And even though he wasn't the eldest son, he got picked to be the commander. So Judas Maccabeus, from 166 to 160, he was pretty much the leader of Israel. And 166 to 164 was the rededication of the temple. The selection of Judas to carry on the struggle was the right one, for he proved to be a very capable leader in defeating the Seleucids. In the first year, he defeated the Syrian governors Apollonius and Saron. Part of Antiochus' inability to put down the Maccabees was caused by trouble he had in the east, which prevented him from being involved in Judea himself. Instead, he ordered Lysias, a regent of the western part of the empire, to stop the rebellion and destroy the Jewish race. So once they were going to fight, now we're looking at a Holocaust. And this, now there's an order to kill all. It's a race war against the Jews. So, another thing you need to recognize about history: the only thing between you and a government official telling you to get on a train is your willingness to fight. And you won't have a willingness to fight unless you have the taste for freedom. In other words, you've got to have the concept in your mind that my freedom is very valuable, and without it, I'm nothing but a slave, and I'm headed to the gas chambers. So here, this Greek general is given orders to annihilate the Jewish race. Lysias sent a large army under the leadership of Ptolemy, Nicanor, and Gorgias. So confident they were of victory that traders went along to purchase Jewish slaves. Slave traders went with them. But Judas decisively defeated Gorgias at Emmaus, causing the Syrian soldiers to flee. I told you Judas was a bad dude. By the way, nations need strong leaders, and you can't expect some limp-wristed leader to pick up a sword and to form a revolution and beat down all of the people who are coming to take your freedom. And therefore, we need strong leaders. In 164, Lysias made one last attempt against the Jews by personally leading a larger army to attack Jerusalem from the south. Judas, however, completely defeated him in Beth Zur, that is 15 miles south of Jerusalem. Lysias retreated, and Judas marched to Jerusalem and regained all of Jerusalem except the Acra. Having captured the Temple Mount, he destroyed the altar of Olympian Zeus, built a new altar, rebuilt the temple, and selected a priest who had remained faithful to Yahweh, as it says here. Thus, on 25 Chislev, that is December 14th, remember the Festival of Lights is celebrated in December. Exactly 3 years after its desecration, the temple was rededicated and the daily sacrifices were restored. Judaism was restored. This event marked the beginning of the Jewish Feast of Dedication or Lights, or Hanukkah as we know it. Judas then fortified the Jerusalem walls and the city of Bethzur. This completed the first phase of the Maccabean struggle. The Maccabees could rejoice, for they had not experienced defeat. Not even one defeat. So they gained their religious freedom back. The problem was there was still Greek leadership in the area, and they did not have their political freedom at that time. I don't know if I want to drag you through the entire history of it because it's lengthy and has a lot of names, but you should know that the Maccabean brothers, all 5 of them, went on tour, and they sought to gain their political freedom by wiping out the Greeks from the area and reclaiming Israel as home to the Jews, having national sovereignty. In other words, they could gain their own leadership and their destiny as a nation. And so they went through a lot of battles, and there was some down times because some of the brothers were killed, and eventually Judas the Hammer, they called him Judas the Hammer, was killed in battle. And they got down to only one son left as their struggle for national sovereignty. And his name was Simon, the only remaining son of Mattathias. Freedom was in the works, though, because a new phase of the Maccabean rule had emerged. All of the Hellenistic aggressors faded from the scene. Although generally speaking, one does apply the term Hasmonean to the whole of the Maccabean family, it is specifically applied to the high priestly house from the time of Simon, that's the last existing brother, the Maccabee, to Rome's intervention in 63, because in that period the Maccabean dream had finally come true. Namely, the Israelites had become an independent nation. Hence, the political and religious life was headed by one family or one dynasty, the Maccabeans, also known as the Hasmoneans. Isn't it amazing that it takes Bible doctrine in the soul to promote the idea of freedom, physical freedom? And an old man, an old priest, a salty old fella, said, no, you're not going to sacrifice to some Greek god here, and even killed his fellow Jew who was about to fulfill the task, and lit the fires of revolution in Israel, and they finally won their independence. Now, this tells us several things. There's the first problem that they're going to face is that freedom is never more than one generation away from destruction. And although the Maccabeans had won their freedom religiously and politically, they're going to have some problems down the way. For a short time, the Romans are going to come on the scene. We're going to cover, I've given you so much history tonight that what I want to do is head into some of these principles. We're going to look at the second Jewish revolt next Wednesday night, and we're going to tie both of these together, and we're going to ask ourselves, why was one so successful and why was one so dismal? So let's take a look at some beginning points here. Man, I have just about worked my way down to time to do the Lord's table, so we'll just take a couple of points here as an intro. The doctrine of pivot versus power politics. Let's have a definition and description just to start off with. The problems of life demand a solution. These problems are both individual and collective. Self-righteousness is the motivator for power politics, which is the satanic system for problem solving on earth. So power politics is going to give you some kind of answer for society's problems, and it's usually going to involve some kind of government. Now we know, let's give some answers to this. Problems of life demand a solution, whether they are individual or collective. So individually, each one of you are going to solve your own personal problems through the application of the 10 problem-solving devices. You can solve any problem of life with one or a combination of any of those 10 problem-solving devices. Individually, the believer can. Collectively, as a nation, we're going to solve the problems by adhering to the laws of divine establishment. That includes the killing of criminals internally through capital punishment, including corrupt politicians, and the killing of enemies externally by the military. See, that solved a lot of problems, adhering to the laws of divine establishment. But self-righteousness says there's another way. And so you end up with a lot of problems with self-righteous people declaring they have the answers and they want to shove them down your throat. So we've taken point one of a definition and description. There's actually going to be 10 points under A, definition and description. So this is a long PowerPoint, but we're going to take history and we're going to combine it with our learning here of this doctrine, and we're going to give it a historical application not only to Israel, but to the United States of America. Why were we successful in repelling the British tyranny in the first round? Why were we successful? And if we face a revolution in our near future by the populace against a government that is proclaimed tyrannizing us, will it be successful, is the question. I think we all know the answer to that, because you don't get bad leadership without a shrinking pivot. And so we're going to take Israel and we're going to take the United States of America. We're going to ask some questions, really. We're not going to make any conclusions of any kind. I know better than that, but we can take a look at history. Okay, that concludes our introduction to the doctrine of pivot versus power politics. This thing's going to have a bunch of application for you and I